Hi, it's Kate Brownfield from ADHD Kids Can Thrive.com. I'm very happy and grateful to be back with the next season of episodes connecting you to parents, advocates, and experts who will willingly share all their insight and wisdom to support parents, educators, therapists, anyone who is trying to support an ADHD child as they get through school and transition into adulthood with a good sense of themselves intact. It is not easy, but it is doable. Another thing I'm going to be doing to help parents who are raising ADHD kiddos is I'm going to be offering a weekly support group for parents that will center around the topic that airs earlier in the week on the ADHD Kids Can Thrive podcast. The link and details are going to be in the description box of this episode. So go there if you're interested in learning more and getting some parent support. Okay, my guest today is Helen. She's a parent of an ADHD child who is grown up and he's now in his mid-20s. I asked her to join me on the podcast to share her top 10 pieces of wisdom that she has gained through her own parenting journey to help with other parents who may be on a similar journey. She happily accepted and she shares openly. Please enjoy our conversation and thank you for listening. All right, Helen, thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to talking to you.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Okay, so Helen is going to give us her top 10 words of wisdom on raising a child with ADHD who is now in his mid-20s. Okay, so let's do the countdown from 10 to 1, and we'll start with number 10.
All right, so my number 10, hello everybody, by the way. My number 10 is to not stop learning about all the new research and information that's coming out. There is just huge leaps and bounds of information from websites and YouTubers and books and podcasts. And so I highly recommend that you find something for yourself as a parent and something even age appropriate for your child. I know that my kid definitely had found something on YouTube that he really enjoyed, the YouTube posts and the community that was created, and even had like a Discord channel and stuff like that. So once they kind of get to the point where they're understanding what it is they have or need, or in the path on the way there, maybe not necessarily 100%. It's very good to have that.
Yeah, good advice. Okay. And what's number 9?
So number 9 is the homework battle is very real. And so how we got through it was trial and error on methods. So unfortunately, at the time, we did not have a diagnosis till my child was 21. So we didn't really realize what was going on. And so I just went through this whole process of like, oh, this is what works for kids. This is what works for kids. And so, we went all the way from a complete refusal to do homework, even in second grade sometimes. Things that were really hard were, pick your favorite color. What's your favorite movie? And as like we would have debates over, well, I can't pick the best, like how do I know? So just went totally philosophical. And at the time, it wasn't clear that was kind of a reaction to, I really don't want to be doing this, or I don't know how to do this. So
okay, Helen, how did you help him get the homework done to get through high school?
So I had friends come over and they did them together, and I put them in like the kitchen at the dining room, cleared off the table. I had him write extra thoughts on as he was doing it on his own. If he had a thought, had stickies next to him, write the thought down just to get it out of the brain. I tried the 15-minute timer where every 15 minutes he would stop and walk around. I would even be in the kitchen, and if um, there were math problems being done, then, yell out when you finish one. And so that I could see that if there was a long pause, that maybe there was something not happening around here. And then when it got to high school, towards the end, like the freshman sophomore year weren't so bad, but towards the end where it gets kind of pressured and stuff like that, then I found an after school program that helped with executive functioning and basically educated them on all of that. So I had to pay for that, unfortunately.
Okay.
But
So like outside support to help him get the work
yeah,
done.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I just was like, I can't do this anymore. I was working. It was just like, I need more of a professional. I'm not a professional. I don't
Yeah.
really know.
Yeah. And I think at that age too, it just helps to have a different
Yeah,
person talking to them about getting the homework done versus
absolutely.
mom.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. So what was number 8?
So it was very hard to tell normal behavior versus excessive defensive behavior and just being argumentative. And so that probably should have clued me in, but he was doing drama and speech and debate, and he's just fascinating in the way that he thought. And so it was just like, oh no, that's normal behavior. That's teenagers, that's boys, that's people doing that kind of thing, speech and debate. And so it was really hard to separate that out. And, it's really hard to tell how much to this day, even it was some just rejection of what he didn't want to do and what
So
he
he
was
would
learning.
argue his way out of things.
Yeah. I mean, just like I don't want to argue with you. Just go find someone else.
So that's the way kind of, well, and was that exciting to him or
Yeah, I think
like
he
a
fully enjoyed
dopamine
it.
hit? Yeah, to debate. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, trying it out on the parents because of course they come home and they just dump on you. They
Right.
release all that stress and tension and then they practice on you and
Yeah,
so
interesting. Okay, he should be an attorney.
a lot of people
Did
say that.
he do well in speech and debate in high school?
Yeah,
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 that's a good outlet for that. That's
yeah.
great. Okay, where are we at? Number 7.
Yeah, so 7 is there's just things you're not going to know for a while about how their brain works because if you can imagine, they're only there in their own self. They don't have any way to compare it to anything else. And so you can't even ask the right question to know because they're not intelligent enough to compare themselves to kids in their class. So I, for the longest time, didn't know that he didn't understand or have a sense of time passing. So he had great stamina and being able to sit and read books like from beginning to end, or um, just sit in front of the homework, whether it was getting done or not, not always. So uh, that kind of the therapists really helped bring that out because I think that they had more of a clue, like these were things that they should be looking for. I just didn't know. And
Yeah.
so, of course, it would have been very helpful. I don't know if I could have asked a question and said, how is it that you sense time passing? But it sort of had to be explained to them by someone that's an authority. And then they're like, oh, this is clearly what's happening to me.
And then did he put structure around that once he understood that?
I don't know if it was like productive structure at the beginning.
Yeah.
Um,
And he was older when he got that kind of insight, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think that it's a slow process. Like it takes months. So then they just tackle one thing at a time. Um, how to turn out the lights at midnight. Um, how much time does it really take to drive somewhere? If you're on Reddit, how long are you on Reddit? Like, time yourself. So it was just this kind of research that was being done, and aha moments of, hey, I'm here and it's an hour and a half later and it feels like 2 minutes.
Right. So bringing some
So,
awareness on where he spent his time. Yeah, that's good.
yeah.
How old was he when he did that? That kind of insightful work.
Um, I think that was more towards the end of high school and then after high school,
Yeah.
um, when he realized like he couldn't manage his time. Why was that?
Yeah. He got curious about it.
Hmm.
Okay. All right. Let's go into what's your number 6 piece of wisdom?
So my number 6 is for the parents to really notice and keep track of behaviors. Um, I started doing this, and I was like, this again before I knew what was going on. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I should keep this list because it was very long. Forgot sweatshirt at school. Didn't even know which sweatshirt they wore. What color was it? All these kinds of things that were happening. Um, and so I started keeping track of it. And then when I finally went to talk to therapists, and then he went to talk to therapists because you have to fill out all these forms, then you're like, oh, okay, I maybe need to put all this in there because maybe it has something to do with it. Kids forget their sweatshirts, they forget their lunch or whatever, they lose stuff. But I just thought it was excessive. That was just a
Yeah.
gut feel. Um, and yeah, so anything that you think is unusual, even if you ask the teachers about it and they're like, "Oh no, that's normal." If you have that gut feel, like, I wonder if I should just keep track of this and like in the back of a book somewhere or on a list. You don't need to show it to anyone.
Yeah.
Um,
That's smart
see some
because part of
patterns.
it is like chronic patterns, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good advice. Okay. What is number 5?
Number 5 is just to not give up. This one is kind of the hardest one, um, because there's this messaging of let your child go. You need to help them with this. Let them go. You need to help them with this. And so you're trying to find that fine line of, well, this is my child. I know them the best. Um, what can I do to help? And so it's this constant like release and bring them back in. And you're worried about their safety and their mental health. And so I would just say, take a breather, do whatever helps, meditate, yoga, walks, running, I don't know, eating ice cream. um uh and it helps to talk to people who you think are safe and might be able to have some insight. But I think, 20 years from now, we'll have even more insight. And so you just don't want to give up, because a lot of therapists have always said to me, it's so nice that, you're supporting them. And you're like, oh, okay, well, that's good to hear because you don't always feel like you are.
Right. Right. It's good, Helen. I'm glad you're doing it because I do think,
Thanks.
right? Don't give
Yeah.
up and don't feel like you're alone. It's number
Yeah.
one. Get so frustrated by everything. Okay, number 4.
Okay. So this one is if one therapist does not work for your child, try another. Um, it's painful. Sometimes they're just tired of talking to different people. Um, but you'll kind of know when they click and try to, give it some time, kind of, for A to that, or B, whatever you want to call it. As a parent, you don't necessarily need to click with that therapist. You just want your child to do that. And maybe it's not just one therapist. If you have a pretty social child, which they tend to be because they compensate by being social, um, there's groups of their own age group or peer group, or, that's super helpful for them. Um, and that's done by some therapists have groups, some hospitals will have groups. So look for that. I think it's really they sometimes they just can't talk to you because you don't know how to engage that conversation,
Yeah.
and it freaks parents out. It's like, oh my gosh, what's going on?
So how long do you go with a therapist before you decide to make a switch if your child needs to?
I think it's a conversation with your child, and also, if they're under 18, the therapist, if the child gives permission, which they generally do, the parent talks to the therapist. And so you can be pretty clear, like, with the therapist, do you think this is working, or do you have stuff you can still work on? I think therapists are super busy, so they're not going to want to just constantly talk to someone and not get anywhere. So I think that's, and certain therapists, because it's not an exact science, are better at some parts of helping the kids than others. Um, some are better at just making them feel good. Some are better at time management. Some are better at helping them get a job. Some are better at helping them explain what we're going through and pointing out behaviors and stuff like that. So, you know, great if you find one that has it all, but I haven't had that. Um, and they also tend to focus on certain age groups or different kinds of things that they're good at, the therapists, I mean. So, yeah, I think you really have to have conversations. Not too many, every couple months, but
Yeah, and find your groove. Okay, let's go to number 3, piece of advice.
okay. It's really hard to tell what's normal preteen or teenage boy in my case behavior and what is ADHD. As I mentioned, we didn't know until 21. He's 21. Nobody could tell. Like, I would ask questions. He would get bored easily, be exhausted by certain events, argue about things, be defensive. But I think in the classroom and with the teachers and with kids and parents, he was fine. And I didn't have the vocabulary or the knowledge to explain this to a pediatrician or anyone or a teacher. So um, I was like, oh, well, what do I know? I'm only never been a parent.
Right. Okay, so what made you decide to have him diagnosed when he was 21?
Well, it was interesting how it happened because he was taking some college classes. He had a therapist down where he was in college, and the therapist, again, my son gave me permission to talk to him occasionally, like every 3 months or something. And he had started this discussion with my son, and my son, it took him like 7 months to kind of he didn't really agree. But finally, I think he did. And so then we had him tested. And unfortunately, the tests
Okay.
only go to 18 or whatever. So, but I had already had him tested in high school, like a breath to see if there was any learning disability. So I had that test. So it came about in a roundabout way, but I think they were trying to convince my child, like, you should really have this looked at. Are you ready for this? And he
Okay.
was
So
not.
the therapist saw flags, if you will,
Hmm.
and
Yeah, and
said
this
you
wasn't
should
the
be
first.
tested. Yeah. But it's the therapist who kind of put it all together and said, let's just
Yeah,
see what happens. Okay.
yeah.
And did your son appreciate that diagnosis?
I think he did. I think he did. And then there was like a podcast from Attitude Magazine where there was a doctor who clearly described it, and I had him listen to that, and he's like, "Oh yeah, that's me." Oh my gosh, wow, really? So I had all my family members listen to it. those that were willing, like, okay, this is what we think we have.
Yeah, good for you. Okay, number two.
Okay, number two is high IQ and inattentive ADHD are very hard to detect because those students do fine in school, grade wise, and they're not hyper. And so there's really no visible sign. Um, and, you know, plenty of the kids, it doesn't really affect them. I think they have high concentration, which is one of the misnomers of attention deficit, because it's not really a deficit, it's an attention thing.
Right.
But inattentive tend to be highly concentrated. And so, it'd be hard for him to leave a play date, like separating from an event, or be talkative in class, or you know, for some reason he hung out with other kids that were older than him. And so um, none of this was really, like, you don't know. So it's really hard to detect. So I mean, I think I read somewhere like the average age is 31-year-old. Um, so if you have any inkling, I would say see if you can at least, maybe you don't need the diagnosis, but you can start reading materials and how to
Yeah.
handle whatever it is the challenge is. Um, but that's kind of really hard because they know how to compensate very well.
Yeah. Yeah. They call it masking. Well, some do, right? Yeah. I
Yeah,
guess it's that high IQ. If you're able to do school to a certain point, right? I guess, and then it catches up eventually. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Helen, let's go to your number one key piece
Number
of
one.
wisdom.
All right. So if I would tell parents and, adults
Yeah.
listening and their kids, is pediatricians and teachers, even though they may work with kids and they have studied kids and they're trained possibly in kids psychology, they are not trained to recognize ADHD in general. Nor do they know how to handle kids with ADHD. They're trained to work with the average child. And I mean, I tell this to everybody. It's like I just did not have a idea that it's like I felt like it all kind of fit together, right? Like, you study kids.
Right. There's what it 10% of kids have ADHD. Surely they've been taught
Yeah.
that they're going to have
Yeah.
some of those kids, right?
Yeah. And teachers have so much to do, and they're trying to keep the classroom going, whatever, all those things. Pediatricians, unless you explain it to them, they're not going to know in a 10-15 minute conversation with the kid.
Yeah.
'Cause the kids don't want to have anything that is unusual about them. Um, so, and pediatricians are dealing with the physical rashes and colds and broken bones, and um so just, I would say, yes, you can talk to them, um but uh definitely, if you have any time, find someone else to help you
To kind of
figure
go
it out.
beyond those 2 points.
Hmm.
Would you recommend, well, maybe your pediatrician could recommend you a parent, a concerned
Yeah.
parent to a different person with that kind, a different expert, I guess, a doctor with that kind of expertise.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Definitely. I mean, you know, parents are only as knowledgeable as their own situation.
Yeah.
Um, but they also tend to be like, yeah, it's worth it to have this looked at. Um, Sometimes even family members will say things like, why? why is your kid doing that? It's really hard to hear that from family, um, if they don't know, but hopefully they have your best interest in mind.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I think any adult that, or anyone that deals with kids, um, and I fully believe
So
that
what do you do when your family says something?
so
How do you handle that emotionally?
it's hard emotionally. I do acknowledge it. Uh, then I tend to go back and think about it and do some research. Um, uh, you know, bring it up with the teachers. Do you think this is going on? You bring it up with the pediatrician. Do you think this is going on? I mean, it's because it feels like you're screwing up as a parent. You're not raising your child correctly. Ultimately, you're doing a bad job. That's what it feels like,
Right.
right? And they aren't any helpful, and you're not any helpful.
So you have
So,
to kind of get more, be a detective,
mhm,
process it
unfortunately,
and know it's not. I mean, we've both learned this, right, over time. So don't
yeah,
internalize it, personalize it,
yeah,
but process it and then become a detective on that information to figure out
yeah.
how to help your child.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would, like I mentioned, I would have them listen to one podcast. I didn't want to overwhelm them or print out an article and send it
Your
in email.
family or your child? Your
My
family.
family,
Oh, to
just
help
like,
them. That's great help. That's how you
yeah,
would help advocate and educate your family. Because I know
yeah,
you're really close with your family,
yeah,
right? So you
definitely.
would so the way you get them on board is just send little educational pieces
Yeah. Yeah.
to
I mean,
improve their understanding. Okay, that's
yeah.
great.
And I would really pick the ones that were just like fully 100% almost, as close as you could get to something that's valuable, once or twice a year. Don't inundate them. That's what worked for me. But they kind of have to, just like everyone else, they kind of have to digest it and then, call and see if they've read it, if they have any questions. And then if they have questions, sometimes you're like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Let me go and figure that out.
Yeah. Oh, great advice. That's one number 1.B.
That's a bonus.
That's the bonus. It is. That's huge advice.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we wrap up, Helen, do you have any other advice or words of wisdom as we close out?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, hang in there. Um, yeah, I mean, I feel for all the parents out there. You're not alone. Um, the school system is, if you're in the public school system, even if you're in the private school system, they are just trying to do the best they can. And I think it just word needs to get out. I really try to talk about it with people so that it doesn't have stigma. I feel like it really, we need to get to a point where it doesn't have stigma. People just don't understand, and until it becomes like the nutritional triangle that we all know, right? Or whatever it is today. Like it's just common knowledge. And then they just track everybody on whatever spectrum from the beginning to the end or one end to the other, which I believe that they will eventually do with all people. They'll be like, this is how the human brains are, and this is where you are, and then then
It's
it'll be
just
no.
normal. Yeah,
Right,
it's just normalized. It doesn't have to
right.
be this um, which I think it is the way it was. And then our society's evolved into this place where it isn't normal, but it is normal. And we need to kind of bring it back to a normal place
Yeah,
and not have it
yeah,
be so stigmatized, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
I agree. Well, thank you for your time, Helen. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
Yeah, you're welcome.